Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Bookshelf Mystic. I got a new microphone. You might see the corner of it in the video, but I'm hoping that this will help the sound quality a lot in my videos. Pretty excited to give it a try. Today I'll be talking about the book Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi. I read this book as a part of the Around the Year in 52 Books reading challenge that I'm doing, and this particular prompt was a book by an author on the USA Today's list of 100 Black novelists you should read. So the plot of this novel is not really the highlight of the novel. It's not extremely complicated. Essentially, Gifty is the main character, and she is the daughter of Ghanaian immigrants. Her mother moves to Alabama when her older brother Nana is a baby. And during her childhood, Nana becomes addicted to opioids. Her father also moves back to Ghana as the pressures of living in the United States as a poor immigrant get to him. So the family ends up being Gifty's mother, her brother, and herself. Later on, and she's telling the story kind of in remembrance or flashback from the time in her life where she is a doctoral student at Stanford studying neuroscience. And she's inspired to study neuroscience because of her brother's addiction. That's kind of the whole plot. There's obviously some things that happen, but it's not a very plot-driven story. The plot is really a vehicle for the main character Gifty's exploration of various themes, from growing up in a heavily Christian community in Alabama to being Black and a daughter of immigrants in America, to the nature of addiction and the soul, and what it means from a neuroscience perspective to be a human. These reflections are really the crux of the novel. It reads almost like a memoir, as the narration kind of goes in between these times in Gifty's life, between her childhood and her current life as a doctoral student. Something will happen in her current life and she'll remember something that happened as a child. This is all sort of spurred on by her mother coming to stay with her after falling into this deep depression for the second time in her mother's life. So her mother's staying with her and she's remembering all these things about her past. And as she remembers, she goes on these thought sort of journeys about religion. She'll tie threads together from different parts of her life under a certain theme. And the overall effect is really engaging. It reads like a person narrating aloud their thoughts as they think about their life and these other things that apply to their life. These really deep thoughts that Gifty has struggled her whole life to understand. Even the climax of the book is not too much of an action-oriented climax. It feels more like an emotional culmination of some of the themes that Gifty's been exploring throughout the novel. I won't say too much here because I'll make this one a spoiler-free review. But if you've read the book, you might know what I'm talking about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. The themes in this book are, I think, what really drew me to this novel. Gifty explores a range of themes. One of the strong themes that's explored is this relationship between Gifty and her mother and the nature of mother-daughter relationships. A lot of time is spent developing this relationship with her mother. It's really kind of central to the plot, and central to a lot of the other themes too. Gifty's mom comes to stay with her as Gifty is an adult, and Gifty becomes more of a caretaker for her mother who's bedridden with this deep depression. Through this, she reflects on the times that her mother has given care to her or her brother, primarily her brother, when Nana comes down from being on opioids. She recounts how her mother, bathes him, a teenage boy who can't, handle the withdrawal symptoms himself. She talks about how her mother is always looking out for the family's finances. She's the one that is working 2-3 jobs to make sure that the family's ends meet. And now, again, she's, bedridden in Gifty's apartment, who's working hard on her PhD. So the tables are flipped, and it creates this interesting way to explore this relationship. It is a challenging relationship. Gifty always has this sense that her mother was more invested in Nana than in Gifty. In fact, her mother has told her so many times that Nana was the reason that she wanted to be a mother and Gifty was sort of an accident. So it's never the strongest relationship to begin with, but her mother's depression and inability to be there for Gifty during hard times in their life, I think has caused some resentment and really a deep, complex component to their relationship. It's obvious that Gifty still really strongly needs her mother's approval, but what that approval looks like doesn't always make Gifty happy. She uses sort of unflattering language when she describes her mother. She talks about her mother's sagging back, and other physical qualities are never described in terms of, my beautiful mom or anything like that. Gifty's kind of embarrassed about her mother's interactions with others in the Ghanaian community and in the white Baptist, I think it's Baptist community that they are a part of at their church. This is not a book about someone who idolizes their mother. It reminds me in a lot of ways of some of the things in a book I read recently, a nonfiction book called You're Wearing That by Deborah Tannen. It's a sociological look at interactions between mothers and daughters. There were a lot of kind of themes in there about daughters viewing their mothers growing old and kind of seeing that as a mirror of themselves growing old, of the flip of caretaking, and of mothers as sort of being unable to have flaws. I think that, Gifty is sort of unwilling to acknowledge that her mother can be a complete human without Gifty as her daughter, and kind of belonging to her daughter. So these are all themes that are explored in that You're Wearing That book that I referenced. It's kind of timely that I read that relatively recently because it gave me a new lens to see this book through. And as I mentioned, Gifty's relationship with her mom really kind of ties in all of the other themes of the book. One other major theme of the book is religion, and Gifty's mother is the one who drives, the family to be as religious as they are. She finds a church in Alabama when she moves to America, and Gifty and Nana become heavily involved in the church as a result. Other themes that I'll get to later that really tie back to her mother's choices too. Her mother's choice to move to America from Ghana was to give Nana a brighter future. And from that decision stems some of the conflict that the family feels being Black in Alabama, being immigrants, and being poor. I think a lot of that Gifty might tie back to her mother in some ways too. And Gifty even out and says that she does blame her mother in part for not doing enough to help Nana with his addiction. So I think, a lot of this really ties into that central theme of Gifty and her mother's relationship. And as I'm talking, I realize that I don't think that Gifty ever says her mother's name. Further tying into that aspect of Gifty's mother belonging to Gifty as mom, not as a full person. So religion is really important in Gifty and her family's life. Gifty grows up very religious. She sees religion as a way to know what's right and wrong and to have a clear set of steps to get to the moral path. She's a strong proponent of those rules and just wanting to follow the rules, which I can heavily empathize with from my own life. And as she grows up, she starts to get disillusioned with the answers that the church has to offer, which is part of the reason she turns to science, to try to answer these questions of what it means to be human and what it means to have a soul and what it means to be alive. And one of the big arcs, I think, of Gifty's religious journey is that she can't find that answer anywhere, whether it's in religion or in neuroscience. And by the end of the book, she's turning back to religion in some ways as a place where she can get some comfort and some meaning, even though it doesn't have all the answers. And in fact, searching for the answers may be the meaning in itself. The idea of religion as being this complex factor in someone's life, especially someone who grows up young and relatively liberal in the United States, is really interesting and really key to me as well. I think that theme of religion being, both a force for good and bad is seen in Gifty's interactions with people in her church and in her interactions with Pastor John, the pastor of their church. Many of the people in the church that they attend as when Gifty's a child are described as being sort of passively or even actively racist, making comments offhand about their kind, things that may stem from ignorance or from prejudice, or in a lot of cases both. And the church as a community not being that welcoming or accepting of them. On the other hand, Pastor John, who is the pastor of their church, is one of the only people that Gifty can call to help with her mother as her mother falls into these deep depressions. And Pastor John and his wife is who Gifty stays with after her mother's attempt on her own life. So it's clear that Pastor John is also a positive force in her life, and that comes from religion too. Putting a personal spin on things, I've gone through a very similar spiritual journey as Gifty. I grew up strongly religious. I think even got more fervently religious as I became a teenager. I think because of that draw of having someone be able to tell me what's right and wrong as the world gets complicated. But as I got older, then from there, I started to not see the same answers in religion that I once had, and turned kind of away from that and more towards a scientific, point of view to explain everything. And now I'm kind of back towards where Gifty ends up, which is there are answers to be found in both places and perhaps even other places, but there is no complete answer to be found anywhere. And sharing that religious journey with Gifty is another reason I really liked this book, and another reason that I could really empathize with her character. One thing I love about novels, especially novels where you find a tie like that to the main character, is that you can imagine yourself in other people's shoes. You can build those ties of empathy. And I think it's especially important to read books like this with a character that you empathize with who is of a different race or a different background than you. I really appreciated that about this book, that it asks me to be in Gifty's shoes as she goes through this spiritual journey, and I find that I have something in common with her. It helps to break down those implicit biases that we have about people who are different from us. So, yay novels. Some of the themes of racism that come up, I've mentioned a few examples already, but Gifty's father, who also isn't given a full name, or if he is, it was maybe only once and I didn't write it down, but he's referred to as the Chin Chin Man. He moves back to Ghana when Gifty is young, partially, probably primarily because of the pressures of being Black in the South in the United States and being poor. There's a sense of pride that the Chin Chin Man is unable to be seen as this full, complete individual. He is a janitor for a while at a school, and the children love him, but he's never really looked on as, a role model adult by other adults. I think that's part of why he moves back to Ghana. And when Gifty goes to Ghana at one point in the book, she does meet up with him again there, and she sees that he has, this nice house and all of these things that he couldn't have in America. The flip from being part of the majority and established member of society in Ghana to moving to America where you're immediately put at the bottom of the totem pole, I think is a big theme of her father's journey. And of course the family experiences racism as well, as I mentioned, in their church and in their community. It's definitely a theme cutting under some of the other things that happen in the book. I wouldn't say it's like the main part of the book, but certainly an important part. And of course, her brother's addiction pulls up a really strong theme of what it means to be addicted to drugs and what drugs can do to someone. I don't have a lot of personal experience myself or anyone that I know being addicted to opioids, thankfully, but I did read a book in the last few years called Dreamland. That book was about the opioid epidemic in America. It was a nonfiction book, and I do recommend that if you want to learn more about it. This book echoed a lot of what I learned about in that book, which is that a lot of times these addictions start as someone being prescribed painkillers by their doctor. In Nana's case, it was painkillers after breaking his ankle, I think, or spraining it during a basketball game. And from there, it was a very quick descent for him to addiction. So I don't have a lot to comment on that theme. It was definitely a huge part of the plot. I just don't have a lot of insight or, smart things to add that the book doesn't already say, or that the book Dreamland doesn't already say about how the United States got into this place. It was really interesting because I think you often hear of the opioid epidemic as being like a white problem. It obviously isn't just white people who experience addiction to opioids, but seeing it as something that affected a Black family in this book was another way to get another perspective on something that is so widespread in America, unfortunately. Bahni Turpin is the narrator for this audiobook. I think she does a phenomenal job. She does accents, Ghanaian accents for the Ghanaian characters, Black Southern accents and white Southern accents for the different Southern characters, and differentiates between several different characters throughout the book that really gives warmth to each. I think she does a great job delivering Gifty's narration as well. In those tenderer moments of introspection, you get the right tone and the right mood. So definitely recommend the audiobook narrated by Bahni Turpin. Overall, I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was a really good read or listen. I especially liked the reflection on some of the themes that I often think about myself, from religion to mother-daughter relationships to racism, although obviously racism doesn't impact me as strongly as it does the main character in this book. So I definitely recommend it, especially if you like books relating to those themes. That's all I've got for this episode. If you've read the book or have any thoughts on what I talked about, feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to have a dialogue. Thanks for joining, and I hope to see you next time.